In the 1960s, when John F. Kennedy asked Robert Frost to be the first inaugural poet, this was not the first time that a prominent American poet and a prominent American president had crossed paths. In fact, it's even before America exists as a country that we have the first major interaction between a future American president and a great American poet. And I think it's telling that at the beginning of our country's history, we have this important meeting. Now, who was this president and who was this poet? Well, this was soon-to-be President George Washington. And the poet that he met and interacted with was a poet named Phillis Wheatley. Phillis Wheatley needs her own series of videos. Her life was truly amazing. In brief, Phillis Wheatley had been kidnapped by slavers in Gambia in the 1760s and brought to America and sold to an American family in Boston, the Wheatley family. Now, the Wheatley family realized very quickly that this young girl, she was probably between 7 and 9 years old when they bought her, that this young girl was unique. She was talented, she was precocious. Their eldest daughter taught her English, taught her Latin, and probably Greek. And by the time Phillis was a teenager, she was translating Ovid, translating Virgil, writing, hands down, the finest verse to be written on the American continent in her lifetime. There's a lot of stories about Phillis Wheatley, the prejudice she faced being a black writer, being an enslaved writer. But the section of her life that I want to focus on today is her fascination with George Washington. Now, George Washington, at this point in 1775, when they first begin to interact, he was not president yet, of course. He had just been appointed the general of the Continental Army who was fighting against the British. The British were holed up in Boston, where Wheatley had grown up, and the Continental Army was basically trying to besiege Boston and wait them out, get them to leave Boston and hopefully leave America. As we know, this would turn into the long, protracted, years-long American Revolutionary War. Wheatley was very impressed with and hopeful for George Washington, and in 1775, she writes him this poem at the end of October. She had never met him. She encloses a letter, an introductory letter with the poem, and sends it to George Washington, who at this point was living in Cambridge, overseeing the siege. Phillis Wheatley writes, "Sir, I have taken the freedom to address your excellency in the enclosed poem, and entreat your acceptance, though I am not insensible of its inaccuracies. Your being appointed by the Grand Continental Congress to be Generalissimo of the armies of North America, together with the fame of your virtues, excites sensations not easy to suppress. Your generosity, therefore, I presume, will pardon the attempt, wishing your excellency all possible success in the great cause you are so generously engaged in. I am your excellency's most obedient, humble service, Phillis Wheatley." The poem she encloses is a remarkable poem and has become one of the most important pieces of literature from the American Revolution. I'm going to read you the beginning and the end of it. "Celestial choir, enthroned in realms of light, Columbia's scenes of glorious toils I write. While freedom's cause her ancient breast alarm, she flashes dreadful in refulgent arms. See Mother Earth her offspring's fate bemoan, and nations gaze at scenes before unknown. See the bright beams of heaven's revolving light, involved in sorrows and the veil of night." We have this epic, tumultuous scene into which Washington is going to step. Here are the last few lines of the poem. "One century scarce performed its destined round, when Gallic powers Columbia's fury found. And so may you, whoever dares disgrace the land of freedom's heaven-defended race. Fixed are the eyes of nations on the scales, for in their hope Columbia's arms prevails. Anon Britannia droops the pensive head, while round increase the rising hills of dead. Ah, cruel blindness to Columbia's state! Lament thy thirst of boundless power too late. Proceed, great chief, with virtue on thy side. Thy every action let the goddess guide. A crown, a mansion, and a throne that shine with gold unfading, Washington, be thine." you can see on the page, Washington is in all caps in the published version that came out in the newspaper soon after Wheatley sent Washington this poem. Washington got this poem and was very, very flattered by it, and he remarks on it thus. He says, this is in a letter to Phillis. Phillis, your favor of a 26th October did not reach my hands till the middle of December. Time enough, you will say, to have given an answer ere this. Granted. But a variety of important occurrences, continually interposing to distract the mind and withdraw the attention, I hope will apologize for the delay, and plead my excuse for the seeming, but not real, neglect. I thank you most sincerely for your polite notice of me, in the elegant lines you enclosed, and however undeserving I may be of such encomium and panegyric, the style and manner exhibit a striking proof of your poetical talents, in honor of which, as a tribute justly due to you, I would have published the poem, had I not been apprehensive that, while I only meant to give the world this new instance of your genius, I might have incurred the imputation of vanity. This and nothing else determined me not to give it place in the public prints. If you should ever come to Cambridge, or near headquarters, I shall be happy to see a person so favored by the Muses, and to whom nature has been so liberal and beneficent in her dispensations. I am, with great respect, your obedient, humble servant, George Washington. It's so interesting to see at the beginning of the American experiment, the beginning of the American Revolution, George Washington, who was a slaveholder himself, call himself the obedient servant of an enslaved writer. It's a complicated situation. But Washington recognizes Wheatley's genius. And I think it's curious how he's so eloquent, Washington is, talking about, I would have published it, and yet I thought people might think me vain if I published it. Apparently Washington's secretary made sure it got published, and it was published in newspapers around the colonies. And so Wheatley, who had already published a book by this time and had gained international fame, both as a poet, but also as an enslaved person, there were a lot of people in England who were trying to get her freed and actually wanted her to move to London so she could be free of American slavery. She chose to stay in America. It's an interesting story she has. But this is the first major interaction we get between a major American poet and a future president. And we see Washington acknowledge and praise her genius and be humbled in the face of it. And, Wheatley's poem, she flirts a little bit at the end of what I read you with kind of calling Washington deserving of monarchy, a crown, a mansion, and a throne that shine with gold unfading. Washington be thine. This is a higher rhetoric than we saw in JFK's talking about a golden age of poetry and power. America has not yet articulated in the Constitution, the Federalist Papers, and other things that we will not be a monarchy. But we see an American poet see the fledgling worth and fledgling power of an American leader and praise them. Apparently, and we'll have to end with this because we don't know a lot about it, but apparently Wheatley took Washington up on his offer and went to Cambridge and hung out with him at a house that would eventually be called the Craigie House, this house that he had headquarters at in Cambridge. She hung out with him. They had tea together. No one knows what they discussed, and I've always wanted to be a fly on the wall. What did George Washington, general, future president, slave owner, Virginian, what did he have to say to the Boston poetess who had been stolen from Africa by slavers, who was currently enslaved even as they spoke? What did they say to each other in that room? We'll never know. But it was the first time those two great presences met. In future videos, we'll look at other American presidents and their interactions with poets. Poetry and power, how are they related? It's complicated. I want to keep thinking about it together. Thank you. If you want, please subscribe to this channel. Leave a comment down below if you're interested or have more questions. Thanks so much for listening.